need to call you back. Something's happened. Are you all right, Mother? We're getting help.
Big Earl held the door. The man who owned the 47 floors above him had been looking for a reason to come downstairs for 2 years and could not say why. Earl Dawkins made $14.25 an hour in a lobby worth more than every house on the street where he grew up. And almost nobody learned his name beyond the one they called him when they called him anything at all. Every Tuesday, an old woman in a navy coat came through the south doors, and Earl walked her to her car without ever asking what she was doing there. He did not know she was the reason. What he did on one cold Tuesday in October would open a locked office and end a silence 11 years deep, starting with a name on a brass badge that no one upstairs was ever supposed to read again. Earl's day started at 4:50 in the morning, before the trains and before the light. He lived on the far end of the West End, in a narrow shotgun house his mother had paid off 2 years before she died, and he liked the house best in the dark, when the only sound was the percolator and the radiator clicking awake. He took his coffee black with 2 saltines, because that was how his father had taken it on the railroad, and Earl had never seen a reason to improve on a thing his father had done. He pressed his uniform the night before and hung it on the back of the bathroom door so the steam from the shower could finish what the iron started. The uniform was navy, with a gray stripe down the leg, and the patch on the shoulder said Tower Sickie in letters that had been white once and were now the color of an old tooth. Earl kept his shoes shined. A man who stood in a marble lobby all day, he figured, owed it to the marble to look like he belonged there. He caught the number 2 bus at 5:40 and rode it. 11 stops downtown, past the barber shop where he got his hair cut on the first Saturday of every, past the corner store where Mr. Hahn kept a stool behind the counter for the older men who came in to argue about the Braves, past the church where his mother had sung second soprano for 38 years, and where they still asked after her by name. Earl got off at the stop in front of the tower at 6:18, give or take, and he stood for a second on the sidewalk every morning and looked up. 47 floors of blue glass. From the bottom, it looked like the whole sky had been cut into bricks and stacked. He had read in the paper, back when it opened, that the building cost $410 million to put up. He could not make that number mean anything. He could make $14.25 an hour mean something. That was the difference between the people who walked in the front and the people who held the door. His post was the south lobby, the quieter of the two, where the elevators ran to floors 3 through 222 and where the foot traffic thinned out after the morning rush. By 7 he had relieved the nightman, checked the visitor log, walked the perimeter of the floor twice, and tested the south fire door, which stuck in wet weather, and which he had reported 11 times in writing, and which had still not been fixed. Earl did not complain about the door anymore. He had learned that complaining was a young man's habit, a way of believing the world was listening. He just put his shoulder to it on rainy mornings and made sure it would open if it ever had to. He knew the building the way you know a person you have stood next to for a long time. He knew that the heat came on in the lobby at 6:30 and that the woman who ran the coffee cart, Miss Yolanda, set up at 6:45 and gave him a small cup for free on Fridays and would not let him pay for it the other days either, though he tried. He knew which of the tenants said good morning and which ones looked through him as if he were one more thing the cleaning crew had polished. He had decided a long time ago not to keep score on that. His mother used to say, sitting at the kitchen table with her feet finally up after a double shift, that a person who only does right when somebody's watching has not learned to do right at all. She would say it the way she said most true things. Quiet, not looking at you, folding a dish towel into a perfect square. You don't help people to be seen, she told him once. You help because somebody has to be the one who stops. Earl was 55 when she passed, and he had spent the 6 years since then trying to be the one who stopped. There was a particular ache underneath all of it, and Earl carried it the way he carried his keys, without thinking about it most of the time, and feeling it sharp when he reached for something. His mother had asked him, the last good year of her life, to come by on Tuesdays, not Sundays, when the whole family came, and the house was lazuli, and she had to be a hostess in her own front room. Tuesdays, when it was quiet and she could just have him. And Earl had meant to. He had meant to every week. But Tuesday was the day the old plant where he used to work ran its overtime. And overtime was time and a half, and he was paying down the back taxes on the house, and there was always a reason that looked like a good reason from where he was standing. He had come by maybe one Tuesday in 3. After she was gone, he sat down one night and did the arithmetic, which was a cruel thing to do and which he could not stop himself from doing. 3 years of Tuesdays was 156 Tuesdays. He had used up maybe 50 of them. He had thrown away more than 100 afternoons with his mother for time and a half. He never told anybody that number. It lived in him like a stone he had swallowed. So when the old woman in the navy coat started coming on Tuesdays, Earl noticed her the way you notice your own reflection in a dark window. The first Tuesday, he thought she was lost. She came through the south doors at 2:15, walked very slowly, and stopped in the middle of the lobby like a woman who had arrived somewhere and could not remember why. She was small and straight-backed, with silver hair pinned up under a dark green scarf. And she wore white gloves, the church kind, the kind nobody had worn downtown in 30 years. Earl came around his post. "Afternoon, ma'am. Can I help you find somebody?" She looked at him with eyes that were cloudy at the edges and perfectly clear in the center. "No, baby," she said. "I'm not looking for anybody. I just come to sit a while. That all right?" It was not, strictly, all right. The lobby had a rule, posted in small letters by the elevators, that the seating was for tits and their guests. But the chairs were empty, and the woman had asked him so plainly, with so little expectation of being told yes, that Earl heard himself say, "Yes, ma'am. You sit wherever you like. That third chair there gets the afternoon sun." She took the third chair. She sat with her purse on her lap and her gloved hands folded on top of it, and she looked out the window at the street for 40 minutes, and then she got up, told Earl thank you, and walked out. He watched her cross to the parking deck and worried, the whole time, that she would fall. The next Tuesday she came again. The Tuesday after that, too. By the 4th Tuesday he had started walking her to her car. He told himself it was about liability, that an old woman falling on the deck would be a problem for the building. But that was the lie he told the part of himself that needed a reason. The truth was that her car was an 11-minute walk from the chair, counting the wait for the elevator down to the deck and the long ramp on level 2, and an 11-minute walk was about 150 steps in which an old woman was not alone. Earl had 100 Tuesdays in him that he had not spent. He had decided to start spending them. He learned her name on the 4th Tuesday, Pearl. He learned other things slowly, over weeks, the way you are supposed to learn things about a person, not all at once like reading a file, but a little at a time. Like the building warming up in the morning. She took a small white pill at 2:30 and washed it down with water from a bottle she carried in her purse. And she did this without comment, and Earl learned to have the water ready in case hers ran out. She liked the south exit because of the ramp. The stairs at the north end were too much for her knees, which had carried her, she said, for 79 years and were entitled to be tired. She drove a 1998 Buick LeSabre, pale gold, that she kept so clean it embarrassed the newer cars around it. She did not say that for a long time, but Earl could tell, the way you can tell, from how careful she was with the word "we" when it slipped out and how she would stop and put it down gently, like a cup she did not want to chip. One Tuesday in the spring she brought him a sweet potato pie. She had it in a foil pan inside a Kroger bag, and she handed it to him at the door on her way out like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "You eat this," she said. "You too thin to be standing up all day." Earl protested, because the rule about gifts, because she did not need to. Horhiba waved her gloved hand at all of it. Boy, I've been making that pie since before your mama had you. Don't you tell me about it. You eat it. Earl ate it that night at his mother's kitchen table, alone, and it was so close the way his mother had made it that he had to put his fork down for a minute and just sit there. The next Tuesday, he thanked her properly. Pearl looked pleased and pretended she did not. Was it? She asked, which is what a woman asks when she knows it was not. He never asked her why she came. That was the one thing he held back, because asking felt like making her account for herself, and Earl had a feeling, the kind of feeling you learn to trust standing in a lobby for 6 years, watching people come and go, that the answer to that question was the heaviest thing she carried. Heavier than the purse, heavier than the 79 years. So he did not ask. He just had the water ready, and the chair in the sun, and the 11 minutes, and he let that be his way of asking. What Earl did not know, and could not have known, was that the answer to the question he never asked was printed in the visitor log he checked every single morning. If anyone had ever thought to read it the right way, he logged every guest who came through the south doors. It was part of the post, name, time in, time out. For 2 years in Earl's careful block letters, the same line appeared once a week, Pearl W. 2:15 p.m. He had written it more than 100 times. He had never once thought to wonder what the W stood for, because in the lobby of that building, a last name was either on the directory by the elevator, or it was nobody, and Pearl was not on the directory. Earl had checked, the first month, in case she was somebody's mother who had a standing lunch. She was not on it. So he filed her, in his mind, under the heading of the people Bildolven Selvik. He put her in the same drawer as himself, 11 floors above the south lobby, in a glass office on the 44th that he had designed to have no clutter and no photographs. Desmond Whitfield was trying to close on a parcel in the old 4th Ward, and could not get the seller to move. And he had not slept more than 5 hours a night in 3 weeks, and he could not have told you what day it was without looking. Desmond owned the tower. He owned a great deal more than the tower, but the tower was the one with his name on the deed and his grandfather's bones in the foundation. And he thought about it, when he thought about it at all, the way you think about a debt you have mostly paid. He had built it from nothing, and that was not a figure of speech. He had grown up in a 2-bedroom house on the south side, with his grandparents after the accident. On I-20 took his mother and father when he was 9, and he had slept on a day bay bed in the front room until he was 17. And he had watched his grandfather leave the house at 5 in the morning for 31 years to take care of a building downtown that belonged to other men. Walter Whitfield was the maintenance superintendent of the Calhoun building, which had stood on the exact lot where the tower now stood, and Walter had run that building the way some men run a country. He knew every pipe and every fuse and every tenant's name and every tenant's children's names. He carries a brass badge with his photograph laminated under a scratch plastic window and a number stamped into the metal, 041, and he wore it every working day for 31 years, and he polished it on Sundays at the kitchen table with the same cloth he used on his shoes. Desmond had loved his grandfather with the whole of his 9-year-old heart, and then his 17-year-old heart, and then the harder, more complicated heart of a man making his way, and the thing his grandfather had given him, the thing that mattered more than the daybed and the bus fare and the co-signed student loan, was a sentence. Walter had said it to him 100 times, standing in the doorway of the Calhoun building in the gray morning, jingling his keys. You don't have to own the building, son. You just have to be the man it can't run without. Desmond had taken that sentence and bent it, over the years, into a shape his grandfather might not have recognized. He had decided to own the building. He had decided that being needed was a thing you survived, not a thing you built a life on, and that the way to make sure nobody ever left you again was to make sure you were the one who could not be left. The one at the top, the one with the deed. Walter died 11 years ago in November of a heart that had given everything it had to a building that was torn down 2 years later. Desmond bought the lot when the Calhoun came down. He overpaid for it on purpose. He built his tower on the place where his grandfather had spent his life, and he told himself this was a monument, and in the quiet hours he was not sure it was not a headstone. He put a small bronze plaque in the original plans down by the south entrance that was to read from the site of the Calhoun, building 1961, in memory of those which you kept it. The plaque was value engineered out of the budget in the third round of cuts. And Desmond had been in a meeting about something else when it happened, and by the time he noticed, the south walls was poured. He told himself he would add it later. That was 9 years ago. His grandmother was still alive. Pearl. She had raised him with Walter, had braided the knowledge of right and wrong into him as carefully as she braided anything, had sat in the front row at his college graduation in a hat that cost more than she should have spent, and had wept and pretended she was not weeping. And Desmond loved her. He would have told you fiercely without hesitation. He paid for everything. He had moved her, over her objections, into a better house, had a woman come 3 days a week to help her, had her medications delivered, had a car service on call she refused to use because she did not trust anyone with her Buick. He took care of her. He took care of her with a thoroughness that he mistook, for years, for the same thing as love, the way you can mistake a photograph of water for a drink. What he did not do was go and sit with her. He had not had Sunday dinner at her table in over a year. He sent things instead of coming. He called on the drive between meetings, 8 minutes the Bluetooth in the car, and asked if she needed anything, and she always said no, and he always believed her because believing her was easier than the alternative. The truth, which he kept at the bottom of himself, under a great deal of glass and steel, was that he could not sit in a room with his grandmother for very long, because she was the last room in the world that still had his grandfather in it, and his mother, and his father, and the boy he had been before the accident. And Desmond had built a life on never going into that room. He told himself a sentence about it to make it bearable. He told himself, I take care of her with results, not with visits. He had said it out loud once to a woman he was seeing, who had asked why he never saw his only living grandmother, and the woman had looked at him for a long moment and then changed the subject. And they had not lasted, and Desmond had filed her objection under the heading of things. People who came from money would never understand. So that was the arrangement of the building, though no one had drawn it on any plan. At the top, a man who took care of his grandmother by never seeing her. At the bottom, a man who took care of a stranger by seeing her every week. And in between them, 40-some floors of blue glass. An old woman in a navy coat who came every Tuesday to sit in a lobby and be near the 2 men she had loved most in the world. One of them 11 years gone, and one of them 11 floors up, neither of them able to come down to where she was sitting. The trouble started in October with a memo. The building had been bought, the spring before, into a portfolio. Desmond still owned it, but he had taken on partners to free up capital for the old Fourth Ward play, and the partners had brought in a management company. And the management company had a director of what they called the lobby experience, who had of saying the word a lanyard and a way of saying the word opt-eyes that made Earl's back teeth hurt. Brant did a walkthrough of the south lobby on the 2nd Tuesday of October at 1:40 in the afternoon, 35 minutes before Pearl was due, and he stopped in front of the third chair from the window and made a note. Sue sits here, Brant asked. Tenants and guests, Earl said, which was true mostly, in the way that the most useful truths are. We've got non-tenant dwell time in this lobby. Brant was reading off the tablet now. Security log shows a recurring visitor, no tenant affiliation. Same individual, weekly extended duration. He looked up. That's a liability, and it's not the experience the asset is going for. We're activating a no-loitering posture, south and north. I need you to start moving non-affiliated individuals along. Politely but along, Earl stood very still. He had a way of standing very still that he had developed over 6 years, a way of becoming so completely a part of the marble and the brass that whatever was being said washed over him without a place to land. "Yes, sir," he said. He had learned that yes, sir, bought him time, and time was the only thing a man in his position ever really had to spend. "Today," Brant said. "The recurring one. Today." And he tapped something into the tablet, and the something he tapped was, Earl understood. An instruction with Earl's name attached to it, a thing that could be checked later to see whether Earl had done what he was told. At 2:15, Pearl came through the south doors. She was slower that day. Earl had noticed it for a few weeks, a heaviness in how she moved, a longer pause at the door to gather herself, and that day there was a grayness around her mouth that he did not like. She made her way to the third-in chair, with both hands on the armrests, and she let out a long breath, and she looked out at the street, and she did not see Brant standing by the elevators with his tablet, watching to see what Earl would do. Earl walked over. He stood beside her chair the way he always did, and he said, quiet, "Afternoon, Miss Pearl. You doing all right today?" "Tired, baby," she said. "Just tired." She patted the arm of the chair. "But I'm here." Earl crouched down then, slow, his knees telling him about it, until he was at eye level with her, which he had never done before, and he saw Brant out of the corner of his eye shift his weight, expecting Earl to be delivering the message, to be moving the non-affiliated individual along. And Earl made a decision that he could not entirely have explained, except that his mother was in it, and the 100 Tuesdays were in it, and the sweet potato pie was in it, and the brass badge in the old woman's pocket that he did not yet understand was in it. "You take all the time you need," Earl said to Pearl, loud enough, just exactly loud enough. "This your chair. Anybody got a problem with that, they can come talk to me." He stood back up. He walked back to his post. Brant was looking at him with an expression that had not yet decided what it was going to become. Earl looked back at him, level, his hands folded in front of him. 61 years old and $14.25 an hour, and not 1 inch of him bending. He had reported the fire door 11 times. He had held the door for people who looked through him for 6 years. He had thrown away 100 Tuesdays, and he was not going to throw away this one. There are things a man will do to keep a job, and Earl had done most of them. But every man has a thing he will lose the job before he does, and Earl had just found out, at 61, in a marble lobby, what his was. He stood at his post and he counted, silently, the way he counted when he needed to keep his hands still. He got to 11 seconds. He stood perfectly still for 11 seconds, and on the 12th, Brant looked down at his tablet, and tapped something, and walked away toward the north lobby without another word. Earl did not know what Brant had tapped. He found out later. For now he had a Tuesday to finish. He walked Pearl to her car at 5 minutes to 3. She was slower than ever, and she took his arm, which she had never done, and they went the long way to the ramp, and at the Buick she stopped and held the door he had opened, and did not get in right away. She looked at him. "You in trouble for me," she said. It was not a question. "No, ma'am." "Don't you lie to me, Earl Dawkins. I been lied to by better men than you, and I know the smell of it." She said it without heat, almost fondly. "I see that young man with the little computer. I know what I am. I'm an old woman taking up a chair in a place that don't belong to me." "You ain't taking up anything," Earl said. "There's 12 chairs in that lobby, and 11 of them sit empty all day. The building can spare you one." Pearl was quiet for a moment. Then she did a thing she had never done. She reached into the pocket of her navy coat and took out the brass badge, the one Earl had seen the corner of 100 times and never asked about. And she held it in her gloved hand and looked at it. And she turned it so the afternoon light caught the scratched plastic window and the laminated photograph underneath. A younger black man in a collared shirt, unsmiling the way men were in old photographs. Serious about being photographed. There was a number stamped in the metal, 0 to 41. My husband wore this 31 years, Pearl said. Walter. He took care of a building that used to stand right where this one's standing. The Calhoun. She ran her thumb over the number the way a person says a prayer they have said so many times the words have worn smooth. He'd leave out at 5 in the morning and he'd say, every day, same thing. Pearl, he'd say, the building can't run without me, but I'm gonna pretend it can, so I'll be home for supper. She laughed, a small dry sound. It never could run without him. They tore it down 2 years after he passed, like it knew. Earl did not say anything. He had learned in the lobby that the most respectful thing you can do with tourist gruff is not reach for it. So he just stood there and he held the car door, and he listened. I come here on Tuesdays, Pearl said. And her voice changed, got smaller and more careful, and Earl understood that they had arrived, finally, at the heaviest thing, the answer to the question he had never asked, because this is the closest I can get to both my men. Walter's in the ground that this building's standing on. And she stopped. She put the badge back in her pocket. She looked up at the blue glass. All 47 floors of it, going up and up until you could not tell where it ended and the sky started. The other one's all the way up at the top of it, she said, and he can't come down. The Tuesday it happened was the last one in October, cold and bright, the kind of fall morning that makes a city look like it has been washed. Earl knew something was wrong the moment Pearl came through the south doors at 2:14, a minute early, which he'd never been. She came in fast and unsteady, one hand out for the wall, and her face had gone the color of the marble. And she made it 4 steps past the door before her knees stopped agreeing to hold her. Earl was already moving. He had been moving, some part of him, since the week before, when he saw the grayness around her mouth. He got to her before she reached the floor, got an arm under her, and lowered her down, the way you lower something you are afraid to break, slow, talking the whole time, low and steady. I got you, Miss Pearl. I got you. You with me? Look at me now. Her eyes found him. Earl, she said, and it came out thin. I'm right here. We're gonna get you some help. You stay looking at me. He had a hand on the radio already. He gave the lobby, the south doors. Older woman, conscious, possible cardiac, get EMS now. And he gave it in a voice so flat and clear that the nightman 2 floors up said later he had never heard Big Earl sound like that, like a man who had practiced for a thing his whole life and had hoped never to use it. He stayed down on the marble with her head in the crook of his arm. He took off his uniform jacket with one hand, working it loose, and folded it under her, because the floor was cold and a person should not be cold. The white pill, he remembered. He went into her purse without asking, because there was a time for manners and this was not it, and he found the bottle and read the label out loud to himself so he would have it ready for the paramedics. The name of it, the dose, 230 every day. He found the second bottle behind it, the one he had not known about, the one for her heart. He lined them up on the marble where the medics could see. People had stopped. A small ring of tenants and the coffee cart and a delivery man stood at a careful distance, the way people stand, wanting to help and not knowing how and afraid of the wrong thing. Brant was there with his tablet, saying something into his phone at a situation in the south lobby and an assassinat and a liability exposure. And Earl did not hear a word of it, because he was telling Pearl about the pie. You owe me a pie, he was saying. You hear me? You been promising me that pecan since June and I ain't seen it. So you can't go nowhere. We got a pie outstanding. And Pearl, on the floor of the building her husband had given his life to, and her grandson had built his fortune on, smiled just brightly and said, it's the butter. You got to use the real butter, and Earl said, I know it. You told me. Real butter, and held her hand, which had lost its glove somewhere and was bare and small and cold in his. The elevator opened. Desmond Whitfield came out of it at a half-walk, already late, already on the phone, already somewhere else in his mind, headed for the parking deck and a closing he was going to miss. He registered the crowd the way he registered most things in his own lobby, as an inefficiency, a thing in his path. He started to go around it. He had spent 11 years going around the rooms that had grief in them, and his body knew the move, the slight turn of the shoulder, the eyes that slide past. Then he saw the navy coat. Then he saw the face. Desmond Whitfield stopped. He stood perfectly still for what the night man, watching the camera later, would clock at 9 full seconds, the phone still up by his ear with a voice in it saying his name. Desmond. Desmond. You there? And the phone might as well have been on the moon. He was looking at his grandmother on the floor of his building, with a stranger's jacket under her head, and a security guard he had never spoken to, holding her hand and telling her about butter. That's... Desmond's voice did not work the first time. He tried again. That's my grandmother. Earl looked up at him. He did not know, yet, who this was. He saw a man in a $4,000 suit who had said the word grandmother. You family, Earl said, and it was half a question and half an instruction. Good. Get down here where she can see you. She don't need to be scared. He shifted to make room, automatic, generous, ordering a man worth more than the building to kneel on his own marble. And Desmond, who had not done what a person told him to do in a very long time, got down on his knees beside Earl. And then Earl said the thing. He said it kindly, filling the man in, the way you fill in family who arrive after, not knowing he was driving a blade straight down through 11 floors of glass and into the man's chest. She comes every Tuesday, Earl said. 2 years now. Sits right there in that third chair, gets the afternoon sun. Sweetest woman in this whole building. He looked back down at Pearl, brushed a strand of silver hair off her forehead with the back of one finger. She told me her husband took care of the old building stood here before. 31 years. And she told me she's got somebody else up at the top of this one. Earl nodded upward toward the 47 floors, toward the glass office on the 44th. Says he can't come down. I never did understand that. He said it without any edge at all, a man simply repeating a thing he had been told. Buildings got elevators. The paramedics came through the south doors then, and the next minutes belonged to them. Desmond had heard it. He knelt on the floor of the building he had built on his grandfather's grave, and he held his grandmother's bare hand on the other side from the guard. And he understood that a man named Big Earl, who made $14.25 an hour, had been coming down to her every Tuesday for 2 years. 11 floors below the office where her own grandson sat telling himself a sentence about results. Pearl's free hand had not let go of something this whole time, and as the medics moved in, it opened, the fingers easing, and the thing she had been holding caught the light on the marble. The brass badge. The scratched plastic window. The unsmiling young man in the collared shirt. The number stamped in the metal, 041. Desmond picked it up. He had held it before. He had watched his grandfather polish it at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons, with the cloth that smelled of shoe wax, had been allowed, as a boy, to hold it on special occasions and never to take it outside. He had not known his grandmother carried it. He had not known she carried it here, every Tuesday 2 years, into the lobby of the building that had taken the place where the man who wore it had spent his life. Desmond closed his hand around the badge, and his grandfather's voice came up out of 11 years of silence, the doorway in the gray morning, the keys. The building can't run without me, but I'm going to pretend it can, so I'll be home for supper. They took Pearl to the hospital on Capitol Avenue. She had had a heart event, a serious one, but she had had it in the one lobby in the city where a man knew her name and her pills and her dose, and had her on a folded jacket with EMS on the way inside 90 seconds. The way doctors say it, that those 90 seconds mattered. The doctor did not know to say that they were 90 seconds. Earl had been preparing for, in a way, for 6 years, ever since 100 Tuesdays went by that he could not get back. Desmond did not go to the closing. He sat in a waiting room on the 3rd floor of the hospital, in a plastic chair the color of nothing, and he held the brass badge in both hands. And at some point in the long bright afternoon, alone, with no one watching, which his grandmother would have told him was The only kind of doing that counts. Desmond Whitfield put his face in his hands and cried for the first time since his grandfather's funeral 11 years before. It was not the way grief sounds when it is performed. It was a low, broken, private sound, the sound of a man who has run out of the thing he had been using instead of feeling. He did the arithmetic because he was his grandmother's grandson and a man who built his life on numbers, and the arithmetic was the worst he had ever done. 2 years she had come. Roughly 50 Tuesdays a year, allowing for the weeks she was sick or the weather was bad. More than 100 Tuesdays she had ridden across town in a 1998 Buick to sit in a chair in his lobby, 11 floors beneath him, just to be near him, and he had never once known, and the not knowing was its own indictment, because not knowing was a thing he had arranged. He had set up his whole life so that he would not have to know. He had the deliveries and the car service and the woman 3 days a week and the 8-minute phone calls. And he had told himself that this was taking care of her, that this was love expressed in the only language a serious man had time for, results. And he had been wrong in a way that no amount of money could buy back, because the only currency she had ever wanted from him was the one thing he had decided he could not afford to spend, which was himself in a chair on a Tuesday. She had wanted 11 floors. That was the whole price. 11 floors and an elevator that ran every 6 minutes. Pearl came through it. She was 79, and she had a heart that had loved a great many people very hard for a very long time, and it was tired, but it was not finished. She spent 9 days in the hospital, and Desmond was there for all 9 of them in the plastic chair, and on the 3rd day, when she was strong enough to be exasperated, she looked at him sitting there in his rumpled suit and said, "Well, it took your grandmother nearly dying to get you to sit still in a chair." And Desmond laughed and then could not laugh, and Pearl reached over and put her hand on his head the way she had when he was 9, and the house was new and terrible and quiet, and she said, "You're here now. Don't you waste it being sorry. Sorry's just another way of being somewhere else." He came to see her on a Tuesday, the first Tuesday she was home. He has not missed one since. It was a week later that Desmond went looking for Earl. He found him at his post in the south lobby, where he had been since 6:18 that morning, holding the door. Desmond had learned by then the things you can learn when you finally decide to ask. He knew that Brandt had filed a write-up the day of the no loitering walkthrough, recommending termination for failure to enforce policy, and that the write-up had been sitting in a queue waiting for a signature, and that the signature it had been waiting for was, by a chain of ownership 3 companies long, Desmond's own. He had nearly fired the man who saved his grandmother's life, by memo, without ever knowing his name. He had killed the write-up. He had also, quietly, ended Brandt's contract, which he did not feel as conflicted about as he probably should have. Desmond came up to the post and put out his hand. "Mr. Dawkins," he said, "I'm Desmond Whitfield. I own the building." He paused. "Pearl is my grandmother." Earl shook the hand. He had worked it out, of course, somewhere in the 9 days, the man at the top who could not come down. He looked at Desmond for a moment with an expression that was not unkind but was not soft either, the level look of a man who has spent 6 decades watching people decide whether to be decent. "I know who you are," Earl said. "She talks about you. Never said your name. Just said she had somebody up top." He let that sit. "She loves you something fierce, that woman. You ought to know that, whatever you've been telling yourself." Desmond took it. He had decided to be a man who could take things now. "I came to thank you," he said, "and I came to—" He stopped, because the next part was going to come out wrong no matter how he said it, and he had thought about it for a week and never found the right shape.
I want to do something for you.
"For what you did, whatever it is. A number." "You tell me the number." Earl was already shaking his head before Desmond finished. Slow, certain. "No, sir. Mr. Dawkins, I didn't do it for a number." Earl said it plainly, the way Pearl said most true things. "I held a door and I walked an old lady to her car. That ain't worth a check. That's just being a person." He looked out at the lobby. The 12 chairs, the 11 that sat empty all day. My mama used to say you don't take what you ain't earned. I've been living on that my whole life. It's about all I got that's worth anything. I'm not gonna sell it to you now because you came into some feeling about your grandmother. No offense meant. None taken, Desmond said, and found to his surprise that he meant it, that the refusal had landed in him like respect. They stood there a moment. And then Desmond, who had built a fortune out of seeing what a piece of ground could become, looked at his own lobby and saw it, maybe for the first time, the way a person would see it instead of the way an asset would. He saw a building that had been engineered in every line of it to move people through, fast and frictionless, dwell time minimized, the experience optimized, every chair a liability. He saw that he had built a place his own grandmother had to sneak into, and he saw the one man in it who had been doing, for free, in a Navy uniform, the only thing the building had ever actually needed, which was to be a place where a person could be known. Then don't let me give you anything, Desmond said slowly. Let me give you a job. A real one. Not this. He gestured at the post, the radio, the patch gone the color of an old tooth. I want to put a chair back in this building for people like her. The ones who come because somewhere in this city, this used to be a place that knew them. I want somebody running it who understands what that's worth. Because Lord knows nobody with a tablet does. I'm going to pay for it whether you take it or not. But I'd be a fool to build it and not ask the one man who already knows how. He paused. That's not a handout, Mr. Dawkins. That's the hardest job in this building, and I'm asking you to take it because you're the only one who's qualified. You'd be earning every dollar, probably more than I'll pay you. Earl was quiet for a long time. Outside, the number 2 bus went by, the one he rode home. What would you call it? He asked finally. I'd call it after the man who kept this place before me, Desmond said. If his widow gives me permission, I have a feeling she'll have opinions about the butter. Earl almost smiled. She will, he said. The plaque went up in the spring, on the south wall by the doors, where it had been drawn into the very first set of plans 9 years before and then cut, in the 3rd round, while Desmond was in a meeting about something else. He had the original wording pulled from the archived drawings. From the site of the Cologne building, 1961. In memory of those who kept it, and beneath it, in a small recessed case behind glass, with a light on it the way you light a thing that matters, they mounted a brass badge with a scratched plastic window and an unsmiling young man in a collared shirt and a number stamped in the metal. Walter Whitfield, Superintendent, 31 years. Pearl came for the unveiling. She wore the green scarf and the white gloves and a hat that cost more than she should have spent, and she stood in front of the glass case, with her grandson on one side and Earl on the other, 2 of her men where her 3rd had finally been put back into the wall of the place he gave his life to, and she did not weep, or said she did not, which is a different thing. She reached up and touched the glass over the badge with one gloved finger. There you are, Walter, she said, soft, just to him. I told you they couldn't run it without you. The chair stayed. They put it back in 3rd spot from the window, the one that gets the afternoon sun, and they made a small program of it that the building had never had, and that no management company would ever have approved on a spreadsheet. A thing for the older people of the neighborhood. The ones who had worked these blocks when the blocks were theirs. The church mothers, and the retired postmen, and the women who had cleaned these towers for 40 years and were never once allowed to sit down in them. Earl ran it. He was good at it the way he was good at everything, quietly, without keeping score. He learned their names. He had the water ready. He walked them to their cars, and when a young guard came on, 23 years old, and convinced the job was about watching cameras, Earl took him out to the parking deck on a slow afternoon, and showed him the long way to the ramp, the one with no stairs, and said, "It's about 150 steps. You count them if you want, but what it really is 150 steps. Somebody's mama is not by herself. You understand me?" And the young man, who did not understand yet but would, said, "Yes, sir." Desmond comes down on Tuesdays now. He clears his calendar from 2 to 3, which the people who run his schedule find baffling and have learned not to question, and he rides the elevator down 44 floors and sits in the lobby of his own building with his grandmother in the chair that gets the sun. He brings nothing. He has finally understood that bringing things was the whole problem. He just sits 11 floors closer than he ever managed to be when it might have been too late, and he listens to her talk about Walter and the Calhoun and the butter, and he is, after all these years, the man the building cannot run without, except that it turns out the building was never the thing, and never had been. His grandfather had told him, in the doorway in the gray morning, that he did not have to own the building, he just had to be the man it could not run without. Desmond had spent 30 years owning the building, all of it, every floor, and it had taken him 11 years past his grandfather's death and 9 days in a plastic chair on Capitol Avenue to learn what the old man had actually been saying, which had nothing to do with buildings, and which his grandmother had been saying too. Every Tuesday, in a chair he could see from his office window if he had ever once thought to look down. You can give a person everything money can carry up 47 floors, and still never give them the only thing they came for, which is you, in the chair, in the sun, on an ordinary Tuesday, while there is still time. I keep thinking about the 11 floors, not the heart attack, the 11 floors. Desmond could have reached her in 6 minutes any Tuesday for 2 years. He didn't, and I'm not sure he was a bad man. I think he did the thing a lot of us do. He sent things instead of going. The car service. The 8-minute call from the road. We call that taking care of someone. I'm starting to think it's just a kinder way of staying away. I wrote Earl to be his opposite. Then I caught myself. I have people I send things to instead of seeing. So here's the question I keep asking myself. Who are you providing for, when what they really want is for you to sit down?